So guys, I was thinking about the last episode, which was an overview of the John Durham investigation that might be coming out with a public report. News is kind of freaking about it. New York Times is crapping all over it, making it seem like it's a pointless thing Bill Barr came up with. And it occurred to me that it really revolves around the creation of the Steele Dossier and how it was used by the FBI and used in Congress and all over the place and became part of the media narrative. And it occurred to me that the average news junkie might not really know what the Steele Dossier was at its heart, which is hot garbage and stuff that no real intelligence professional would rely on or not see from the jump as a complete fraud. So I'm going to walk you through today on why the Steele Dossier sucks, never should have been talked about, and was basically a giant fraud that I'm really glad that they're investigating. Let's go. Guys, it's time for some game theory. Hello and welcome back to Game Theory Today. I am Eric Garland and I am an intelligence analyst by profession. And it's interesting. I've had to talk a lot to the public on Twitter and now on YouTube about things pertaining to intelligence analysis, which means the news is entirely too interesting when you need intelligence analysts to help you parse through things. So the fact that I'm on your screen is a sign that the world has gone slightly mad, but I'm really happy to be here with you and you guys make it fun. Let me first impel you, beg you even to click subscribe. I'm not proud here. The subscriptions things really help with making new episodes and stuff like that. So hit subscribe, click like and leave comments, all that stuff. So the prostrating now over. Let's get into the dodgy Steele Dossier and how it really pertains to the John Durham investigation, which some folks out there might be trying to tell you that it's not worth looking at. When we get through with the dossier, much less any of the other stuff, you're going to go, oh, that is why this got a full investigation, because it is a hot mess that involved multiple countries, multiple agencies, a whole lot of misbehavior, and really messed up the way we discussed national security, just as we really needed to most. So technically, the Durham investigation was to investigate the origins of the Russia investigation when Barr originally announced it, and that's completely inaccurate because the Russia investigation completely misstates how we analyze Russia in terms of national security. Because the Russia investigation has been going on at least 100 years in its modern form because Russia has a lot of active spy services. This goes back to the 20s and teens of the last century. The Communist Party kept the Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police, and just put them to use other ways. And they've been targeting elections around the world, including in the United States, since the jump. So the notion that a Russia investigation started with Trump has always been inaccurate. It is looking at the beginning of the Steele Dossier and some people trying to gin up a narrative about Trump and Russia, and that is actually worth investigating. But what it's not doing is even looking at the posture that the United States government had towards counterintelligence against Russia in 2016. It's not even that narrow, because that's actually a huge subject that could never really make it into public. Here's why. You have a special counsel's office that John Durham is running that's, primarily investigating in a law enforcement way. A real assessment of the Russia investigation, or what we knew as a country, and I'll just remind everybody, there's 330 million Americans. There's a zillion people that work for the federal government, and there's quite a few in the intelligence community, tens to hundreds of thousands that work for the Department of Defense and others, that at least some of those folks have their eyes trained on China. In fact, we have multiple agencies that keep track of China, and we spend a whole lot of money on them. And no one special counsel's office could possibly assess the last several years of how we looked at Russia. In fact, it would probably need to be done by the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which is why that office was set up in the first place, to be a place to meet in the middle to talk about the intelligence products being created by all these various agencies. Moreover, you wouldn't just be looking at DOJ and FBI and how they handled certain information that came in off the street from this British dude. You'd need to be looking at multiple agencies and how they handled their tasks. For example, you need to look at the CIA, which manages all the human sources that they have in Russia and elsewhere that would tell us about Russia. You'd have to look at the activities of the National Security Agency, which does signals intelligence, all the technical stuff, very, very secretive, of course. The Defense Intelligence Agency, which would handle all the manner of assessing Russian military capabilities, including their abilities in intelligence, both cyber and even human stuff. They do counterintelligence at DIA as well. Then you'd have FBI counterintelligence and what they know about Russia. And, that's a huge enterprise. The Russian mafia has been all over us since the fall of the Soviet Union as a major threat, and they're interlaced with spies, so there'd be a lot to cover in there. And heck, you'd probably even need the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, since their satellite imagery corroborates a lot of the stuff picked up by other folks. So if you're looking at one Russian dude who's walking around with a cell phone, and he's meeting with other people, and that's part of the intelligence that you're gathering. When you think about all these different sources, you might be able to hack into his cell phone, hear where he's going, track the GPS on his cell phone. The satellites pick up where he gets into his car and goes somewhere else, and maybe he meets with a confidential source that we have over there, or somebody hears about the meeting with a confidential source, and all those agencies go into putting together that picture that analysts can share with each other on the United States government side. Isn't that neat? There's a lot going on there. That is not what John Durham is up to. So the Russia investigation, he's not doing an assessment of the performance of our ability to, assess the activities and attitudes and decisions of these foreign countries. There's a lot of people involved in that, and we get tons of help from our allies and stuff like that. So that's not what he's up to. He's looking at Crossfire Hurricane, how a specific investigation got opened up against some people around Donald Trump in the 2016 election. And Durham's also looking at the production and dissemination of this thing called the Steele Dossier. That is not an intelligence product. It's tarted up to look like one. And then it was spread out to the media in a very reckless fashion, or it would have been quite reckless if it were a real intelligence product, and I'm going to show you why it's not. And otherwise, it's just a very successful propaganda operation. And that's what Durham is tearing into. So the question is, what was the Steele Dossier? Long story short, it's a PDF that was made up to look like an intelligence product, but in no way is an intelligence product. In the vernacular, the Steele Dossier is a bunch of bullshit that was made to look like an intelligence product for journalists who don't know any better. Worse, it was attributed to a guy who was a very high-ranking British spy who knew damn well that it didn't look like an intelligence product of any use to a decision maker. The whole operation worked extremely well. This stuff was disseminated out to the media that put it out at a very specific timing to interfere with the United States intelligence community, which was delivering its own report that we'll talk about. And everybody involved should have known better. So who was the author of the dossier? Well, it's named for Christopher Steele, who was a former British intelligence officer. He was with the Special Intelligence Service, MI6, which collects foreign intelligence on behalf of the British government. They are one of our closest allies in general, and they're our closest intelligence ally. The United States and the UK form the basis of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance. That's all the English-speaking countries, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US and the UK are the heart of that, with particularly their signals intelligence collection. So, the guys from MI6 are supposed to be our homies. It's very interesting. Steele was apparently born in Yemen. His two parents were in Yemen working for the Met Office, which I gather is like the National Weather Service for the UK, which basically means that they probably were spies too, or at least one of them was. Steele, in his career, which started in about 1987, he became a foreign intelligence officer. He got deployed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So he went to Moscow under what's known as official cover, which means you go and you basically pretend to work for the State Department or the equivalent thereof, the diplomatic mission out in the country, and really you're collecting information from other spies that work with you and for you. You collect your own intelligence and you write it up and you take it back. He eventually got exposed as an intelligence officer, never went back to Russia, but he ended up rising to the rank of the head of the Russia House, which is that's the Russia desk for MI6, probably the most elite intelligence service in the world. Not to say that the Brits are necessarily better than the United States, they generally are, but of all the offices that was the most sophisticated, of course it was the one aimed at the Soviet Union for so many years. So this guy made it to the absolute top of the game. After 22 years service in 2009, Steele left to form Orbis Business Solutions, which is a private consultancy. Now that part, going private, is not unfamiliar at all. There's nothing particularly sketchy about that. I come from the world of competitive intelligence, which is the techniques of nation states that get applied to commercial matters, companies looking at other companies, sometimes governments looking at economic issues. The whole field was started by people from the nation state services. We're pretty closely allied in that regard. And a lot of times when people get out of their official government service, they sell these things to corporations. So, a retired spook going in business for himself, not a big deal. Now, Steele was reportedly working for Oleg Deripaska in 2012. You may remember from the last episode, they just busted the former head of FBI counterintelligence in the New York field office, Charles McGonigal, because that guy was on Oleg Deripaska's payroll, just like Paul Manafort was. So while starting your own consulting shop, nobody minds that in the government. In fact, you can also even work as like a retired spook. You can go work for the bad guys as long as it is officially sponsored by the good guys, as long as you tell your former bosses. That's one way that people can get an eye at what the bad guys are up to. And as long as you're reporting in and you're not doing anything to harm your home country there, that thing happens too. There's some people who look like bad guys because they're hanging out with bad guys, and it looks like they're hanging out with bad guys after they retired, but maybe they didn't retire all the way. Given what Steele's done with this pile of bullshit intelligence report that he foisted on the American media, I'm not sure if he qualifies for Team Good Guy anymore, so I'll leave that up to the nice people at Scotland Yard, MI5, MI6, and them. So when did we learn about the Steele Dossier? Well, the timing of the dossier's appearance in the media is really suspect. It's a lot of the main problem here. It was damaging to the public discussion about national security when we needed it the most, because there was a foreign agent headed into the White House. And that was already out in public, which means all the spooks had their hair on fire. And there had to be a lot of transfer of information between intelligence world and the general public, since we want a peaceful transfer of power. The American people spoke and wanted Donald Trump as their president. They were going to get him, by golly. And yet, for the first time ever, really it was incumbent upon some people who knew about national security to explain the context of this and how dangerous that was about to be, and how the guy got elected with the help of foreigners in a way that had never happened before. We needed to have a very serious discussion. Everything was really quite tense around that, and the Steele Dossier did what it was potentially designed to do, which was really screw up our ability to discuss this amongst ourselves, cast a whole lot of suspicion, distrust, and general disrepute on the U.S. intelligence community and law enforcement community when they needed it the most, when they needed the most trust from the public, and the appearance of the dossier really screwed all that up. November 8th, 2016, we have this election. And we all wake up the next morning and realize that no, the pantsuit lady did not win. The Queen's mobster guy won, and that was quite alarming. I got calls at 3, 4 in the morning. I was talking to intel people right after, and I stayed up for about a month and wrote a thread on Twitter December 11th, 2016. But here's some of the other dates there around Trump, Russia, and other security problems. 2 days before I wrote my thread, turns out I was not the only person that was concerned about this. President Barack Obama on December 9th ordered a full assessment from the intelligence community on Russian interference in the election. An assessment is like the most complete intelligence product you can create, especially if you're asking it of the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which was being run by Jim Clapper at that time. And it was going to put together all the relevant agencies, everything they know in the most serious way for the President of the United States. That was ordered on December 9th, 2016. Fast forward to January 6th, 2017, the intelligence community produces an assessment, just like the president asked, and has called a hearing for January 10th, where they're going to explain this document to the American public on a televised congressional hearing. On the 10th of January, also, BuzzFeed drops the dossier. They publish these reports allege Trump has deep ties to Russia. The digital media ate it up, and very soon it eclipsed what the actual government was telling us. And the damage of that publication, of that document, which I'm going to step you through just how fraudulent it was the whole time. You know, it not only damaged the media dialogue, that people were writing stories about this garbage instead of what the actual professionals were putting out into public, but it also damaged the congressional debate, because you got guys like Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes, who have plenty of their own problems with regards to foreign interference or foreign influence, put it that way. Being able to just say this, the dodgy dossier, they were able to yell that in all these Mueller hearings, and really for years. And here's the bitter part. They weren't wrong. This product is really problematic, and it got used by the FBI in ways it shouldn't. But what do you compare it to? First, if you're not used to intelligence products and how they are made by nerds for really the most important decisions that anybody can make, I'm going to step you through a tale of two reports, if you will. The intelligence community's actual report on Russian interference in the election that came out, and then we'll get into the dossier, unfortunately. So ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, published Assessing Russian Activities and Intentions in Recent U.S. Elections on January the 6th, 2017. This is what real intelligence looks like, especially at its most polished. This is the declassified form of the report, as in the really juicy stuff that you need a security clearance for is not in it, but it is produced in a clean, clear, graphically crisp way to communicate some of the most important stuff that the intelligence community is ever going to talk about: the sanctity of an election and the transfer of power that hadn't still happened yet. Remember, it was we're talking a couple weeks out before Trump takes office, so this thing had to be done really well, and it was. So I'm going to step you through that. One of the things that you'll notice about this document, and this is how professionals actually do intelligence, it tells you what they were trying to accomplish. It tells you how they did it. It tells you what the language means. So they get down into when we use certain, when we talk about confidence interval, if we say something is high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence, or range of probabilities, and the specific words they're going to use. They even have indexes of this is what we mean when we say this. It's the top of the trade craft. It's great. They knew their audience and they were trying to help them. Now, as an intelligence professional myself, I'll tell you that's always the goal, whether it's the President of the United States, CEO, a school board, or the general public. You're trying to inform them about a really important decision. The president might have to decide on whether to nuke someplace, I guess. When it came to this election, the election was kind of water under the bridge in a lot of ways, and we wanted it to stay that way because we certainly didn't want the transfer of power interrupted. So I guess the stakes for the general public was how to feel about it, how to think about it, and maybe which politicians to get behind in their suggestions on what to do differently so this kind of thing doesn't happen next time. So it's just as important in a lot of ways than decisions a president will have to make. And so doing a good job is important, and you can see that right on the page. So when the ODNI gets into more detail, they report which agencies contributed. They say there is a way more interesting classified version of the president got, but also that the conclusions were precisely the same, which is important. It's like, well, is this just what you're showing us? Yes, it's what we're showing you, but we also showed the president. What we can show the president is how we got there. And that might be stuff that really isn't that interesting to the general public. I mean, as far as I'm the general public, I'd love to see that stuff. But generally, it's a need-to-know basis. But you're not being told something that's different than the guys behind the scenes. That's really important when you create an unclassified report or a declassified report that is full of our understanding of something. And just to point out the difference, unclass and declass are the acronyms we use. Unclass or unclassified means it was never intended to be classified. Declassified or declass means that this would be classified or would have been classified, but a decision has been made to release this thing in redacted form perhaps, or in this case, a special version created for it. Because understanding what our intelligence agencies understand, like really knowing what they're thinking, is usually in itself classified. So I find that distinction very interesting. This is not an unclassified report. This is a declassified report where we just took out the stuff that would go to the president. It's a huge event in American history. So boom, the intel community gets right to it, the key judgments that the Russians absolutely helped Trump, that it was Russian military intelligence. This isn't just some teenagers. There is nobody in the basement in New Jersey, as was intimated by President Trump. No, this was GRU, Russian military intelligence. And what did they assess with high confidence? That they wanted to help Trump and hurt Clinton. And by the way, when you use that term, high confidence interval, anywhere, that means, boy, do we really know it. That's the highest level of confidence we can give in an assessment. And that says, you can take it to the bank, essentially. So within a month, our intelligence community was able to come out to the American people and the world and say, this is what Russia did to us. So you can see the character of this kind of professional product. Real intelligence products have a clear focus. They set out the questions that have been asked. They use plain language and facts to deliver the analysis. And as a result, these kind of products are as useful as possible to the decision makers who depend on them. And that ain't what the dossier was at all, or even close. And as raw intelligence, it's also badly written hot garbage. And what do I mean by raw intelligence? I want to be fair here and compare apples to apples. The Steele Dossier was never purported to be what we'd call a finished intelligence product. Finished is the intelligence term for the final product that's been researched, corroborated, edited, torn apart by your bosses, torn apart by their bosses, looked over by other people, gets ripped up, sent back, red ink, and then polished after it's been cut down, or has got the chop, as a lot of people will say, by numerous professionals who are all working as hard as you. It's a lot of work. The dossier is not analyzed as a finished product, and I don't want to be unfair and compare raw intelligence, raw human intelligence report, and the finished product. However, as raw intelligence, it also sucks. And that distinction is important because the media really did compare it basically directly to the ODNI's report, if they even mention the ODNI at all. So since this document took over the national conscience in place of the actual professional's work, thank you very much, then it at least deserves to be scrutinized at least as hard as we would our own raw intelligence reports. So that's what I'm going to do. Raw intel would be the term for like a single or small group of analysts gathering together a bunch of facts for use in a more finished product down the road. It's a work in progress, or it's a snapshot of a few people you talk to, a few satellite images that you've looked at. It's not been condensed down. It's not been processed through analysts, senior analysts, and it's not yet something that can really contribute to a decision just yet. It might be a bunch of short updates on a topic or on a theme, and it might not have any other information corroborating it so that you can make definitive statements and then assign your level of confidence interval. And Steele Dossier looks like bullshit on that level as well. There's nothing good about it. In fact, let me give you an example of a raw intel report from my own company, Competitive Futures. This is a roundup that we do of important strategic stuff for our clients, not specific clients, but in general, which is why I can share it. It's not on a specific topic other than here's the important stuff that's really changing in the world. And this is from a couple days ago. You're going to see that I included the part about McGonigal being pinched as a former head of the FBI counterintel for being on Russian payroll. That kind of stuff is really important. It's like the world is moving. But you can see what we do is we keep it factual, brief, and limited, and we keep the style clean. I'm not just trying to rack on these guys for how their document looks, but I'm going to explain why that's really important, actually. Now, I can't show you our direct equivalent of the dossier, which would be a summary of human intelligence or human sources reporting in, which is something I do. It's when I got my career started on 25 years ago. I can't show you even a chunk of the work that I've done in that regard, or what a raw intelligence product would look like, because all of that is confidential and the NDAs go out forever and a day. It's confidential, which means you wouldn't ship it to 10 newspapers like Chris Steele did. But raw human reports also have to be for a defined purpose and need to use a dry, clean style that doesn't misinform the reader. So we're all on the same page here. So let's look at the dog's breakfast that is the Steele Dossier. And I want to highlight this again. Steele ran the Russia desk for MI6. He was a senior intelligence executive in the top spot in the world. And they're British. These people, he's an Oxbridge dude. He's British. They dot their I's, cross their T's. They are sticklers for style and for formality. So I'm gonna hold him to a pretty high standard here, and he does not do well. His summaries, or somebody in his position, his summaries should be crisp and actionable. His background on this Russia stuff should be like more vast than any other human being on the planet, practically. That's not an exaggeration. He was at the best intelligence agency, at the desk that's been doing this the longest and the best, and he ran the thing. And he's been working on Russians since 1987 that we know about, and he's even possibly from an intel family. So this guy should know a lot, and that should really show in his work, don't you think? But it turns out Steele's main subsource was a dude who got charged by the Durham investigation, a guy named Igor Danchenko, who was a Russian national living in the United States, living in the DC area, working for the Brookings Institution. And Danchenko had a subsource who fed him information about the Russians called Chuck Dolan. That name may not ring a bell, but he was an official in the Clinton administration back in the 90s, State Department, I think. And more recently, he was a PR executive at Ketchum, which is a public relations company that counts the Kremlin as a client. So Chris Steele is not reaching back through his decades of experience, probably knows hundreds of Russians that he can still talk to. And this is his thing, man. And he probably still has a bunch of people at MI6 who could at least give him some broad brushes, even if he doesn't retain his security clearance or equivalent thereof. He walked out the door in 2009. That was only 6-7 years before he started this project of looking at Trump. He probably knew a few people back at MI6 who could give him a few hints. But instead, he's going to two dudes in Alexandria, Virginia. Okay, so knowing that as the context, that you got Steele, who was working in 2012 for Oleg Deripaska, supposedly looking up the money that Paul Manafort stole from him. So there's a little bit of a bias there. There's a little bit of conflict at the very least, if not like the dude's turned and he is an agent of the Russians at this point. Can't tell that. Like I said, there's the outside chance the British government enjoyed him doing that. And he reported in, I guess. And nevertheless, his main sources are two dudes who are sitting in Washington, D.C., a Russian and another guy paid by the Russians. So with that as the backdrop, let's look at the intelligence product itself. First of all, it is not clear in this document who the target audience is, and that matters. Is this a government decision maker? Is this what you would do for, a member of parliament or, the Ministry of Defense? Is this going to a political operative in a campaign? The backstory is supposedly that Republican donor Paul Singer started this with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS back during Rubio's campaign to look at Trump. And then it was then passed off to Hillary Clinton's attorneys at Perkins Coie, Mark Elias, and Michael Sussman. This is like all for politics, right? So you got to assume that the political operative is not as swift with some of this stuff as, the Minister of Defense in the UK or the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And, you have to write it differently. It's like sort of if the ODNI's report about Russian interference was written for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it would use completely different jargon. Not only would they be able to understand it, but they might really appreciate the precision that would give. Whereas if it's an unclassified or declassified version that's aimed at the general public, they're not going to get any of that stuff. It might not be appropriate, and it won't be very readable. So how you write this matters. And the way this thing is written is something that Steele, in his job as a senior intelligence executive, he would have ripped apart any junior analyst that wrote like this. So my eye is caught by a number of terms that get thrown around a little loosely, especially for the behavior that accompanied this document. It says confidential, sensitive source. Now, sensitive source is an intelligence term of art, meaning that national security would be harmed if the source were exposed. And that level of sensitivity goes into how classified it becomes, how compartmented it becomes. So it's a pretty important term. But it mainly refers to how hurt would national security be if the person mentioned in this document were revealed. It would mean that you wouldn't just go out and shop it to 10, 20 newspapers, which is what Steele did. Also, this is a little thing, but it's really not for an intelligence professional. The fonts and the formatting throughout the document are all over the place. And this really matters in making your stuff look believable. And let me tell you, when you're giving somebody bad news, something I learned very early in my career is one of the reasons you need everything like formatted perfectly, every comma in the right spot. You need all the names spelled correctly. I had a dossier way back in the day where we had to give somebody bad news. And when you give them bad news, they look for any reason to tear you apart. And we spelled like some very complicated Polish name the wrong way, dropped off a Z or added a K or something. And on that, they didn't want to pay us even because we were disappointing them. So that's the level of detail you need to go into. Also, this needs to be believable. This is just a piece of paper with some information on it. If you want people to take action, it's got to look good. It's got to look professional and all that. Also, Steele's a private businessman. He's selling these services. Somebody might recommend him based on this kind of stuff. So when I see the fonts all over the place, it looks like different people did the stuff. It's just all over the place. It looks like a little thing, but that's way out of character for a high-ranking British intelligence official. Now, if you go through the Steele Dossier PDF, you'll see it's broken up into a number of different reports, and each one has a different title. And the title of each report, they are all over the map. And they're mostly like conclusions of the raw intel. They're not like a title for what you have coming overall or what the point of this thing is. They've taken some of the points that are made in the report and they make that the title. It's just really weird. Like if it were me, this thing would be entitled Project Orange Mob Guy, and the raw intel would be there, and the updates maybe from the week. That reporting style, that's not undoable. But you wouldn't make a conclusion in every raw report. You would pile that together. You'd write that up into paragraphs that a normal person can read and go, oh, that's what's going on. This is raw, but they're doing these weird conclusory statements up front. And that's normally done, for finished reports where you're sure about what you're saying. And if it's what we call a monitoring project, it could be that too. I've had projects over the years that, you get hired for 18 months at a time and you're expected to report every Friday, with what you got that week. That happens. And maybe that could be the case here. But if that's so, monitoring projects are almost always aimed at analysts that are like inside another agency. So private consultants will do monitoring and hand it off to usually an analysis group within the client. So it's an intel report that's going to another intel analyst, and you do not have to constantly make conclusory statements for them because they know what the project's on. You know what I'm saying? And Steele's updates have all these different themes that don't seem to relate to what we would call kits and kicks about the Steele Dossier the way that we were told. Like we were all told this is this document and it goes into how the Russians own Trump. Okay, we have what's known as kits and kicks, key intelligence themes and key intelligence questions. And the theme is overall, what are we looking at here? And, that's the big major question. And the big major question is broken down into little baby questions. So here it would be like the theme would be the foreign compromise of Donald Trump or the Russian compromise of Donald Trump. And the question would be, how does the Kremlin own him? If this thing is focused, it's like we're looking at Trump. We think he's owned by a foreign power. How has that been done? And Steele's report doesn't really do that. It's all over the map. Also, if you're really looking at intelligence about Russia and Trump, wouldn't you also be interested in the other countries he does business with that might also own him, like China, Saudi, Turkey, Egypt? Maybe that was the point, though, to make sure we only asked about this one country. So now, sadly, we must turn to the actual content of the report here. We need to find out what Chris Steele uncovered about how the Russians may have had compromise on Donald Trump. If you've never read the report, let's sum up here. In the year 2005, Donald Trump paid $41.3 million for a home in Palm Beach. He outbid Jeffrey Epstein even. And in 2008, a scant 3 years later, the Russian oligarch Dmitry Rybovlev bought it from Trump for $95 million, a record price. But in 3 years, over doubling the price from a Russian oligarch to this guy Donald Trump, that's basically laundering him $54 million. The Steele Dossier doesn't mention it anywhere. Okay. In 2015, Donald Trump was fined $10 million by Treasury FinCEN. That's the intelligence agency that looks at money laundering from and for terrorists, mobsters, bad guys all over. Trump had to pay a $10 million fine for violating anti-money laundering and know your customer regulations. And this is in his Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, which was a known hangout for Russian mobsters to spend all this money and bet all this money. Just classic money laundering for the mob through a casino. That is nowhere in the dossier. In fact, there's not a single mention of Russian mafia anywhere in the dossier. Now, this is a dude who was the world's expert in how Russia does something. This is 2016. This is Donald Trump, who's from the Genovese crime family, and he has been laundering money for all these guys, and he has been laundering money for foreigners, and he's been doing business with Russians and all that. And the Russian mafia, Steele never mentions it. Okay. This is the stuff you can Google, guys, and Steele somehow finds none of it. But there is pee-pee on page 2. Looking at what the thing actually does try to say, on page 1 it says, Russia has been cultivating Trump for 5 years, which is nonsense because the Russians had been cultivating him for at least 3 decades, maybe 4, definitely since the 80s, possibly from before that. Hard to say, right? But, they had visits arranged. He was a Russophile, this Trump guy. Now, you might try and wiggle out of that and go, well, they meant cultivating him as a presidential candidate. Yeah, well, Christopher Steele, as top of the heap in the intelligence profession, he would have said that. He would have said they've been cultivating him as a presidential candidate. That detail matters. And by the way, cultivating for what? The language has to be very precise here, and it ain't. It also says Trump has been receiving intelligence from the Kremlin. Intelligence. That would make him an agent. You have to be pretty damn trusted for the Kremlin to hand you the product of the FSB, the SVR, or the GRU military intelligence. Intelligence is a very specific word. Not, we pass off some rumors and hints through our cutouts in New York City, or, he's got that guy Felix Sater through his dad's old network, we keep Trump. No. He receives intelligence from the Kremlin. That's explosive. They never really explain more. Seems important. Then they kind of veer into intelligence operations against Clinton and what the Kremlin's doing there, which would take serious knowledge. And you'd need its sources inside an intelligence agency for this. If this product isn't complete and total bullshit, then you'd need real serious sources, multiple of them, before you could come out and state this. And those are the kinds of sources that would totally get murdered, if you took this report and handed it out in PDF form onto BuzzFeed, which Chris Steele does. Interesting, isn't it? But also, wait a minute, how much are you paying? Every question that you order from a private intelligence company drives the cost up. There is, are we talking about how the Kremlin has compromised Donald Trump, or are we looking at its total counterintelligence posture vis-a-vis the next incoming president here? Those are two different questions. One's much bigger than the other, and they kind of just veer all over the place, almost like it's two dudes in Washington that just kind of came up with it and wrote some shit down in different fonts. Then you get more language that is just mangled here. So it says under detail, speaking to a trusted compatriot, and then sources A and B. It's weird. Trusted compatriot is not a precise term. I've never heard it used. This is sloppy, yet it's so specific about who the sources are and where they work, and even some of their work history, that they're dead if this thing gets out, because it does not take people some guy who worked here but used to work here, who worked with this guy over here. That's how people get murdered. That's why we classify intelligence to begin with. But anyways, Steele and Simpson have no problem just handing this out to journalists who never ask this question. Is somebody going to get killed? This thing looks really, really serious. Should I even have this? No one asked that. There's other loosey-goosey terms in here. Source C, a senior Russian financial official. Guys, what's a financial official? What does that mean? Because you could have a government guy working for the Treasury. That's a government official who maybe works in the Ministry of the Treasury or the central bank or whatever. Or if you're talking about a private bank, that's a bank executive. It's a corporate executive in the finance sector. I don't know what a financial official is, and guys like Chris Steele get paid to make the difference there. Then we get source D is a close associate of Trump. Why would they need one of those? Why are they cultivating Trump associates here? Unless they have direct connections with the Kremlin, or they've heard Trump talking about the Kremlin. But why do they need to spend any time on those, since they've got the Kremlin apparently wired up and they have a bunch of spies in there? Just none of this makes sense. And the writing style, I understand I'm pile driving whoever put this dossier together. I must hope it's not Steele, because it's this weird narrative, like fishmonger's wife gossipy style, that it's just not how intel people write. So then you go to like report 2, and we're on to a synopsis of Russian state-sponsored cybercrime. And guys, it's not worth going through all this. I'm going to cut this short. It's not worth going through just how bullshit all of this is. This document makes these most sweeping conclusions and claims the highest levels of confidential informants around the world. But Steele used guys in Alexandria, Virginia. And Steele and Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS, who had been working for Partisan, which is a front for the Kremlin. So like everybody who's part of this is getting paid by some Russian somewhere. These guys bounce around New York in September, October, and they expose this human networks to a bunch of the journalists all over, like David Korn with Mother Jones, Michael Isikoff with Yahoo News, and the guys at BuzzFeed. They bounce around with this super secret network like it ain't no big thing. But guys, that's not the worst of it. Because if you've read the Office of Inspector General's report and you've followed any of the prosecutions, which may be what really comes out of the Durham investigation here, the real problem is that for some reason, the FBI used the Steele Dossier in applying for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants, FISA warrants. They used this and they said, oh yeah, this looks good. This looks good. The highest level of intelligence analysts in the FBI went to a judge at the FISC, that's the court that hands out the FISAs, and said, yep, this looks good. And that judge read through the application and looked at this stuff with the peepee and the bad fonts and the super, oh, we've got super secret sources here. And they gave a warrant, at least on Carter Page, who we later find out was actively working for the CIA at the time. And how the FBI came to look the other way on garbage of this magnitude, this is why I'm telling you, the people on television, the people on Twitter, some of them work for the DOJ or have worked for the DOJ and know better, that are saying, oh, this Durham thing, it's all political crap. You go and review what we've just said about the Steele Dossier and the fact that that ended up in the applications and that they relied on it for a while and they didn't throw this bum out the office and that they were paying some of these guys as informants. You tell me that don't deserve a full investigation of the ethics. I think it does, and I think we're going to see a lot more from it. Although a lot of this is mixed up with spy services and some people who are compromised by foreign governments within our DOJ, within the FBI and other agencies. So we might not hear all of it. But I'm pretty glad that somebody's taken a look at this, because this kind of garbage can never happen again. So that's it for this episode. Please leave a comment. You must be interested in intelligence tradecraft, or you might have an opinion on the Steele Dossier. Tell me when you first heard about it. Tell me, have you ever read the government report on Russian election interference? It's going to be in the description, link to that DNI report. And hit subscribe. Talk to me, Goose. Thank you for being with me, and talk to you soon.